and welcome back to my channel, Girl Gone Crypto. Today I've got Kenny Lee, the co-founder of Manta Network, here with me on the show. So Kenny, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me here. Appreciate it.
So I'm excited just to dive into everything Manta Network and what you guys are building. So just to kind of kick things off, why don't you go ahead and give us a high-level overview of what Manta is, what it is that you guys are working on and doing, and we will just kind of dive into it from there.
Yeah, so Manta Network, we are building what we call privacy as a utility for Web3. And I guess that's essentially us in a nutshell, right? Like, I think the big problem we're trying to tackle right now is that we see privacy as a really big problem, especially as the use cases, as the market starts growing. And one of those problems is the immutability of transactions on chain, right? So something that I don't know, buy 10 years ago, right, is still going to show up on your account, right, 10 years later. And this isn't an issue if it was just your bank account statement, because then only you can see it, right? But when it's on chain, everyone can see that embarrassing NFT that you probably bought, 10 years ago that you might regret, after you come out of your degen phase. And that's a very contrived example, but, I think it highlights the core of the issues of scalability and usability when it comes to thinking about your own privacy. And so, yeah, that's essentially what we're trying to fix.
Yeah, I am so excited to dive into that because obviously I feel like there's a lot of different ways to try to kind of reach that goal, if you will, of more privacy, more anonymity, which is something that I think is very important to people in the crypto industry. They want more of. It's something that people go to really great lengths to try to keep as much anonymity as they can. But like you said, with on-chain transactions, if you have a doxed address, everyone knows everything that you're doing. Then they're all up in your business. And so, obviously there's privacy coins, but then there's also privacy solutions like what you guys are working on to try to help people that are already in a certain ecosystem add more privacy. So I'd love if you could just kind of walk us through how exactly it is that you guys are able to enable more privacy on certain assets and kind of like how that works.
Yeah, I think you made a really good distinguishment there, right? Because we ourselves are not launching like a privacy token. We are building the privacy technology whereby other tokens can privatize themselves. And so what we're doing is we're using the Substrate Framework, which is a unique framework to Polkadot. That's where we're starting off within the Polkadot and Kusama communities. And the reason why we're doing this is because we want to be able to privatize layer 1 infrastructure tokens. And so anyone using the Substrate Framework and plugging into the Polkadot ecosystem, you have that added value of cross-chain communication, which means that now someone can launch their own layer 1 network and be able to communicate with us, Manta Network. And this is where the whole privacy thing comes in, right? So if you just kind of think about it at a high level, what we're really doing is we're taking your token from this other network, and we're wrapping a privacy preserving version of it. We mint a privacy preserving version of it on our network. And then you can send that, you can transact that, you can swap that, you can do whatever you want with it. You can even interact with other chains using that privacy token through, Substrate. And be able to essentially do everything in, a privacy preserving manner, for lack of a better term. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so let's dive into that piece of it just a little bit more. And so it sounds almost like you're like, okay, here's like a little privacy blanket, over your asset. But how exactly does that work? Because I know that, there's obviously a lot of different potential ways to do that. Is that there's a bunch of decoy addresses, so you don't really know which one it is, or is it, can maybe walk us through how it actually becomes private?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different applications of privacy these days, right? There's the very basic pseudo anonymity, right? Which is your wallet address, which is, it helps to some degree, but you have to keep that wallet address private for the rest of your life, because as soon as it becomes unprivatized or your docs, right, everything's reviewed. Then there's trusted execution environments, which is, a specific kind of black box on a computer chip, and that's encrypted, and there's computation that can happen on that layer. And then there's zero knowledge proofs, which is what we're using. So
Okay.
it's much more of an algorithmic based approach. And so like, if you think of it as a hash function, maybe I'm getting a little too technical here, but it essentially you can scramble it up. You can scramble the data up in a way where you can still prove that that data is contains the information that you have, but no one can unscramble that data. So
Mm.
it's like making scrambled eggs.
Yeah.
Right?
I know
Like
you're making me hungry here.
when you see scrambled eggs, you know, well, I mean, maybe not these days because there's so many different alternatives to scrambled eggs. But you know, back in the old days, you see scrambled eggs, you know that they're made from eggs, and you know what went into them. You know, eggs went into them, salt went into them, but there's no way
Mm.
you can decompose the scrambled eggs back into like an egg,
Uh-huh.
right?
Right.
And so like that's kind of the approach that we're taking with zero knowledge proofs.
That's a great analogy. I for zero knowledge proof. I love that. So, so like, let's walk us through just a little bit of like an example from like a user perspective. So let's say like, so is my whole address a scrambled egg now, or do I have to scramble every transaction, or kind of how does that work?
Yes, every single transaction is its own scrambled egg.
Okay.
And so, you know, it's in that way, it's not really linkable, right? Because
Mm.
like, you know, and this is just an analogy that I like, where we're coming off of like that was invented 2 seconds ago. So, you know, bear with me here, it doesn't match perfectly. But, you know, like on the one hand, if it was just like one scrambled egg and you're just like sharing the scrambled egg, then everyone can be like, oh, well, it came from that guy, right? Because it's like, oh, that guy's plate looks conspicuously odd because it's got like bites of scrambled eggs missing, right? But like if every single transaction itself was a new scrambled egg, right? Like everyone feels like they're getting their own sort of independent scenario that can't
Mm.
be traced back to each other. And so,
Right.
yes, it is the latter sort of example.
Okay, no, that's great because I'm just trying to like get an image or a picture in my head of kind of like what that would look like to actually use it. So, like, let's say maybe walk us through that a little bit. So, you guys are built on Polkadot. So let's say someone is a current, you know, like kind of in the Polkadot ecosystem user. Like, how would they actually use Manta Network? And then let's say someone isn't really that familiar with Polkadot, or they, you know, maybe they're more like on the Ethereum or the, you know, BSC side, but they are like curious, or they're wanting more privacy. And so they're like looking at this like, hey, this is kind of interesting. I want to get involved. Like, what does it look like to actually use Manta Network?
Yeah, so you know, for everyone outside of the Polkadot ecosystem, there are definitely bridges built on Polkadot to, you
Mm-hmm.
know, bring people in. And you know, I won't get into details about
Yeah.
bridges, but once you are inside the Polkadot ecosystem, then being able to privatize the tokens in this current chapter of Manta Network, right? You would go to Manta Network's app and you would privatize through there, and that whole wrapping process is fully automated by the network, fully decentralized by Polkadot. Um, but in the future state, right, like the ideal scenario here is, you know, we one thing we really want to focus on is like user experience, right? Because privacy is important, but I think we've been kind of conditioned in the Web2 space to be like, privacy is awesome, but I'd rather have convenience. And so, you
Totally.
know, people check, I accept all cookies rather than like, you know, unchecking each one, right? And we're all guilty of this. I'm guilty of this. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but but you know, like the idea here with user experience is that we want to get or become as frictionless as possible. And so like thinking about like a chapter 2 of Manta Network, right? Like being able to toggle on and off privacy directly from the Polkadot wallets, right? And thinking about Manta as a utility whereby, you know, you turn on your water and water drips. You don't
Mm-hmm.
care about where it comes from or who's providing it to you, right? The
Right.
same idea with Manta Network on Polkadot. We want to make sure that when people can toggle on and off privacy, it just happens. They don't have to worry about the fact that it's Manta Network providing it to them, right? And so like that's
Got it.
really where the utility aspect comes in.
Got it. So one thing that I thought this was a really interesting kind of phrase. I don't know if I've really heard, but maybe you can break it down for us. Is I saw kind of like your Twitter byline, if you will, says bringing PriFi, or however you say it, to Polkadot. Is that privacy finance? I haven't
Yeah.
heard that phrase before, and I really like that. So,
Yeah, I don't know how often it's used.
mm.
I've only seen a handful of people use it, and ironically, we're all in the privacy space. So, you know, we're probably just
Right.
like in an echo chamber. So yeah, privacy finance. I mean, if you think about it, right, like every single on-chain transaction, well, I guess the term transaction implies, something financial, is every single on-chain transaction is a financial transaction. And so, adding a privacy layer to that. But I think what's really interesting about it is like, if you think about how the market will expand, how the space will expand, and how Web3 will be adopted 3 to 5 years from now, right? Like, I remember like once Ethereum came out with Turing completeness, and then there was the whole ICO boom, and like there was a lot of vision of like, oh, decentralized Uber and decentralized Yelp and decentralized this, right? And like, not much of it actually came into fruition after 2017. But the whole philosophy of that kind of like implies what the trajectory of Web3 will look like. And so if you really scope it out 3 to 5 years from now, right? We maybe will be in a world of decentralized Uber and decentralized Yelp or decentralized other apps. But in that case, right, like every single action that you take on Web3, which is kind of at the most fundamental level a transaction, it becomes more than a transaction, right? It becomes your online identity, because now you've interacted with the Uber smart contract, and you paid this much and you moved at this time, right? And like, this type of data harvesting becomes so valuable, right? Because it's no longer just like, oh, you made this payment, that's cool, right? It's like, okay, you did this, you did that. And now all of a sudden, anyone with an internet access can download your entire transaction history, build a full profile of you. We're Cambridge Analyticaing ourselves, right? Like anyone with an internet connection is now Cambridge Analytica.
Right. No, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think that it's something people that have been in the industry for a while are hyper aware of, this whole idea of kind of protecting their identity. But I think that people that are kind of newer into crypto maybe haven't really gone down that rabbit hole so much yet. But the more that they get into them, they're like, oh, wow, I've like, kind of publicly allowed all this information to be like kind of available. And so I think that what you guys are doing with, and maybe you can touch on this a little bit too, with like kind of integrating into ways that people are already interacting is so smart, versus like, hey, come over here and start using this whole other thing. Like you were kind of saying, it's like, you don't know, like people don't necessarily care where the water is coming from when they, turn on the faucet, they just want it to show up. So can you kind of walk us through like maybe why that was important to you guys, just kind of like integrate really seamlessly into like the user experience that people are already doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely very important to us, because like when we first started, right, like there were a couple of things we did. The first thing we did was like validate whether or not this is actually a problem. We went out, we talked to about like 400, 500 people who are in the crypto space. And we actually had quantified the problem of privacy, and I can like send you the report and stuff. Really interesting.
Cool.
But that's one thing we did. And the other thing we did was like, try to figure out why people aren't as concerned about their privacy, right? Like on the one hand, there is, that level of ignorance, because the whole idea of ignorance is bliss, right? Like, I don't know that I need to worry about privacy because I have this wallet address, right? But as soon as people start transacting more, we start seeing this trend of people being like, whoa, I can't keep transacting from the same wallet address because this person knows that I interacted with that person, and like I have this many funds, and this is being staked on Aave, et cetera, right? And so like then people start thinking, okay, how do I keep my private or my identity private? And they start like splitting up all this stuff and doing like all these like, equations in their head to try to figure out the perfect formula for keeping themselves private. And that, I think that is the point where a user becomes like, oh, I am now understanding why privacy is important. But the current solutions, right? Like you really have to jump through hoops in order to stay private. Like I think like, for example, a privacy token, like it definitely has its use case, but if I'm trying to send Ethereum to you in a privacy preserving manner, I don't want to have to create a new wallet address with a privacy token, ask you to create a wallet address with a privacy token, and all that, right? Like we want it to be frictionless. And so ultimately it just came back to, how do we design something that doesn't ask the user to create a new experience and put another step into their process, but rather integrate into their existing process? And so like it's kind of the philosophy about like how we're building out all of our products right now.
No, I love that. Cause yeah, you're right. Like someone might think, like I say, like Monero is cool, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to like, all right, everyone go make addresses so we can do this. So
Yeah, it's tough, right? It's the
yeah.
friction.
Absolutely. So I'm really glad we had a chance to like get this kind of really big picture view of what it is that you guys are building, why you're building it. But I'd love to get even just like maybe a little more granular on like, what are you guys working on now? What's kind of coming next for Manta Network? What is the team really excited about? Maybe just kind of like walk us through like what's kind of happening with you guys right now.
Yeah, so we have our testnet live, and we've been working simultaneously on integrating other crypto assets into our main network, so that once we launch the app, people will start being able to, privatize all sorts of different assets from the Polkadot and Kusama ecosystems. Without getting into too much detail about, those ecosystems, we are launching on Kusama first because we have what's called a parachain, which allows us to go onto mainnet. And we're securing one for Polkadot in the near future. But for now, right, like launching on Kusama will be our first step. Private payment, and this allows people to privatize Kusama and various Kusama assets, and every other network that's connected into Kusama. And so that's the first step, right? And then simultaneously, what we're working on right now, and this is kind of going into like one of our founders' backgrounds, right? So like Shumo, our technical co-founder, he used to work at Algorand, and he was building out the smart contracts Turing complete layer of the whole Algorand network. And so we're taking a lot of his knowledge in building these sort of Turing complete VMs and reapplying them to Manta Network, such that people will be able to actually build decentralized applications from the ground up, but with that added layer of privacy built into the actual VM. And so that would be step 2 for Manta Network, right? And then as we look into the future, right, like all this kind of centers around usability. And one of the critical pieces for us in terms of usability is, integrating into other products and services rather than just trying to ask people to build on ourselves. And so, one of the things that we're doing right now is we're coming to realize like, okay, we need to be better, not just on the technology side, but on the business, on the partnership side as well. And so we are like very actively hiring, right? Like we have a team of, just to kind of give you a breakdown, we have a team of 20 people, of which 17 are on the engineering side. And like myself and 20 people are handling all the business stuff. And so like, that's just not enough time in the day in order to really scale out the partnerships and building out that ecosystem. And so definitely want to start doing that. And so, yes, we're hiring if anyone's interested in joining us. But yeah, like the future state of Manta Network, I think is one where, we exist within the Polkadot ecosystem, and even outside of it, right? But like we exist in a manner where people may have heard of us, they may not have heard of us, but most people would be using us or some other privacy solution, right? Because the ultimate vision here is to try to deliver privacy to Web3 in the most frictionless way possible. Right, we're not the only ones doing it. There's lots of projects out there with their own approaches, and so yeah, like I think we're all kind of congregating around a central goal and moving forward in our own way of trying to figure it out.
Awesome. Well, Kenny, it's been so much fun to have you on the show and just really get to dive into everything you guys are building at Manta Network, and even just to get your thoughts on like the future of privacy and Web3 and why this is just a topic in general that people should really be paying attention to. Because I think this is a conversation that needs to happen more and more with so many new users in the crypto world in the last year, NFT users. These are things that maybe they haven't totally started thinking about yet, but they need to. And so like, I really appreciate your thoughts and you just taking the time to come on the show and share your knowledge with us. So so thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Join us if you're looking for a job. Not you directly. I know you're with that. I mean, like people listen.
Well, if someone is watching this and they do want to connect with Manta Network, whether that's applying for a job or just joining your community and starting to use the network, where's the next best place for them to go?
Yeah, so the gold standard is Telegram and Twitter, right? Twitter just at Manta Network, and Telegram is at Manta Network Official. All one word.
Perfect. All right. Well, I will link to that below. So if anyone's watching this, you can just click right through in the description box. So thank you again so much, Kenny. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah, really appreciate it.